tragedy, recognizing that it's a tragedy of our own making and a tragedy of the far left who has marshaled an entire movement, a lunatic fringe against our law enforcement officers. I think what is clearly happening here, and it's going to keep on happening unless the Democrats wake up and say, you know what, you don't have to agree with our immigration policies. You don't have to agree with what the president or vice president entire about immigration enforcement, but why don't you take this to the ballot box? Why don't you vote? Why don't you organize? Instead, what some of them are doing is encouraging people to get violent with our law enforcement officials. It's disgraceful, and it's got to stop.
Just to follow up on that question, and again, thank you for taking questions, Mr. Vice President. There's clearly a lot of emotion in Minnesota, across the country, over this incident. You're calling Renee Good a deranged leftist. There's been heated rhetoric that we've also heard from officials. What responsibility do you and the president have to diffuse some of the tension that we are seeing play out in Minnesota, bring down the temperature as this investigation is unfolding?
What we have a responsibility to do is to protect the people who are enforcing the law and protect the country writ large. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, you deserve to have the people's laws enforced in the United States of America. Now, again, I'm not happy that this woman lost her life. I'm not happy that this woman was there at a protest violating the law by interfering with a law enforcement action. I think that we can all recognize that the best way to turn down the temperature is to tell people to take their concerns about immigration policy to the ballot box. Stop assaulting and stop inciting violence against our law enforcement officers. That's the best way to take down the temperature. And we're not going to give in to terrorism on this. And that's exactly what's happening. People trying to antagonize, to commit acts of violence. They throw bricks at them. Sometimes they shoot at them. Sometimes they dox them. Sometimes they go to their place of residence and harass their families. This is efficiently as possible, as we are creating a new assistant attorney when a far left fringe is inciting violence against our brave law enforcement officials, that we're no longer going to enforce the law. That's rewarding the very people who are engaged in this garbage. The actual reward that they just got is a new assistant attorney general who is going to prosecute and investigate this stuff even more aggressively than before.
Yeah. Thanks for taking my question. So the head of Minnesota's investigations agency says that the U.S. Attorney's Office has essentially cut off the state investigations agency's access to the investigation. What is the precedent for that, and why shouldn't the Minnesota officials on the ground have access and evidence to work on this investigation?
First of all, I wish the state officials in Minnesota would investigate why you have so many people who are using their vehicles and other means to actually interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation. The precedent here is very simple. You have a federal law enforcement official engaging in federal law enforcement action. That's a federal issue. That guy is protected by absolute immunity. He was doing his job. The idea that Tim Walz and a bunch of radicals in Minneapolis are going to go after and make this guy's life miserable because he was doing the job that he was asked to do is preposterous. The unprecedented thing is the idea that a local official can actually prosecute a federal official with absolute immunity. I've never seen anything like that. It would get tossed out by a judge. So what I'd like Minnesota to focus on is the real issue, that they're encouraging people. Minneapolis officials are encouraging people to commit violence against ICE officials. It's ridiculous. It's got to stop. Go ahead.
Mr. President, thank you. You said earlier that there's a left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and make it impossible for ICE officers to do their job. You told my colleague just now that there's an investigation going on into that network.
Yep.
So if everything that you say is true, how does being part of that network justify being shot?
Well, being part of the network doesn't justify being shot, but ramming an ICE officer with your car, that's what justifies being shot. It's not a good thing, by the way, but when you force somebody to engage in self-defense, it's almost a preposterous question. I'm not saying that funding some of this stuff justifies capital punishment. Nobody would suggest that. The reason this woman is dead is because she tried to ram somebody with her car and that guy acted in self-defense. That is why she lost her life, and that is the tragedy. Now, there may be other violations of the law and other penalties that are associated with those violations of the law. For example, if you are funding violence against our law enforcement officers, I'm not a prosecutor. My guess is that's not the sort of thing that earns capital punishment, but it should sure as hell earn you a few years in prison if you're funding the effort to try to assault our law enforcement officers. What is, I'm sorry guys, what's going on here? You guys are meant to report the truth. How have you let yourself become agents of propaganda of a radical fringe that's making it harder for us to enforce our laws? You just asked me a question that presumed that the reason why this woman died is because she was engaged in legitimate protest. She tried to run somebody over with her car, and the guy defended himself when that happened. Next question.
The investigation is still ongoing.
I said next question.
Mr. Vice President, I mean, you presumably watched the video yourself. There's not the slightest doubt in your mind, having viewed it, that the victim, you still believe that she deliberately tried to round him despite seeing this video?
Look, I don't know what is in a person's heart or in a person's head, and obviously we're not going to get the chance to ask this woman what was going on. What I am certain of is that she violated the law. What I am certain of is that that officer had every reason to think that he was under very serious threat for injury or in fact, his life. What I'm certain of is that she accelerated in a way where she ran into the guy. I don't know what was in her heart and what was in her head, but I know that she violated the law, and I know that officer was acting in self-defense. It raises an interesting point, though. Look, if people want to say that we should have a legitimate debate about, what was she really doing, right? Was she panicking when she drove into this officer, or was she actually trying to ram him? That's a reasonable conversation. What's not reasonable is for so many of you to plaster all over the media that this was an innocent woman and that the ICE agent committed murder, which is what many of you have said explicitly and some of you have said implicitly. That's what I have an objection to. The idea that this was not justified is absurd, and I think everybody knows it in their heart. Yeah.
Mr. Vice President,
in the green jacket.
Taking down the temperature, it seems like political violence is ratcheting up and riots could be around the corner. What steps does the administration have planned to try to unite America? Average people on both political sides are so tired of fighting with each other, and I think all the journalists in this room could agree with me that we don't want to be part of the problem. Do you have any words to unite America?
I know you don't want to be a part of the problem, and I think that's true of a lot of you. I'm not sure it's true for everybody, because the reporting over this has been one of the biggest scandals I've ever seen in media. I've never seen a case so misrepresented and misreported when you have a guy who was defending himself and is now being treated as some sort of federal assassin by so many of the people in this room. First of all, let me say about crime. You mentioned violence. One of the things we're proudest about is that you saw violent crime over the last year drop by 20%. Why is that drop by 20%? Is it because we're attacking our law enforcement officers, or is it because we in the administration are empowering our law enforcement officers to enforce the law? I think that's one of the ways you take down the temperature, is you make people feel more secure and safe in their person and property. That's why we care so much about protecting our law enforcement, because it accrues to the benefit of the entire national community. I think that we can absolutely talk about the ways in which, we can lower the temperature by discussing differences in a reasonable and rational way. Again, I'm happy to talk with any congressional Democrat or any of you about our immigration policy, about why I think it's necessary, about why I think it's in the best interest of the country, about why the President of the United States was elected to actually enforce the border for the first time in at least 4 years. So here's the problem. That's not the debate so many people are having. They are actively covering for people who are committing acts of violence against federal law enforcement. It is preposterous. The way to take down the temperature is to stop it. Have your debates about policy. Attack me. Attack the President of the United States. Don't attack our law enforcement officers. They are trying to do the job the American people demanded that they do. They are not policy actors. They are enforcing the law. They should be treated with a modicum of dignity and respect. And the fact that they're not is why incidents like yesterday happened. The one final point I'll make about this is, look, there's a part of me that feels very, very sad for this woman, not just because she lost her life, but because I think she is a victim of left-wing ideology. What young mother shows up and decides they're going to throw their car in front of ICE officers who are enforcing legitimate law? You've got to be a little brainwashed to get to that point to where you're willing, not just to protest, that's fine, not peacefully protest, but throw your vehicle in front of legitimate law enforcement officers and drive your car